everyone. Let's get dangerous. Who are you talking to?
No one. Your mama. Shut up. Take your pick.
It's Jake Ciely.
He's opening our minds to new ideas. Kill him!
You just made the list.
Oh, wait, you're serious? Let me laugh even harder.
It's all in fantasy, tales of the ranks.
Sure, we talk about it all the time. Really? No. Burn.
Game on, you Ducks. It is All in Fantasy. It is week 15. Hopefully you are in the playoffs or about to enter the playoffs. One way or another, your season is still alive, which I'm assuming if you're listening to this podcast, you are. Or you just love my voice, which I can't imagine that being the case. But we're going to talk waivers today with Chris Allen over at MLB, or I was about to say MLB. You see, I'm so interested and invested. As you can see, I have the Mets hat on. Like the Juan Soto things, like running around the neighborhood naked, like I'm going streaking. So like instead of MB Fantasy Life for Matthew Berry, as everybody knows, like MLB came to mind. At Chris Allen FFWX. So I have two questions for Chris Allen: is what do you want to pimp for everybody, Chris, to make sure they know where to follow you, where to listen on Sunday mornings, by the way, as I know, and what does the FFWX stand for? I always wondered.
Oh, so first and foremost, I appreciate you first, Jake, for bringing me on. I'm a big fan of yours for a number of years, so thanks for having me on. But second, I guess pimping stuff over at Fantasy Lab. Go check out all the stuff we got over at the site. I had so many good content creators over there, from Dwayne McFarland's Utilization Report, the shows I do Mondays and Wednesdays with Ian Harditz and Paul Charchian. Of course, Dwayne jumps in as well. Kendall Valenzuela, Pete Overs. I mean, so many people, good folks there doing awesome work. So I would just encourage everybody, if they haven't already, go in and check out the site in the free newsletter and all of that, so that you can get a chance to check out all the content. But my stuff specifically, outside of the YouTube shows, do the wide receiver cornerbacks matchups. Then also, if you need any last minute start sit advice, Sunday morning shows with the one and only Matthew Friedman. Heck of a time, like hanging out with him and answering people's questions before roster lock. But the FFWX, so that is fantasy football weather. So that is how I got into this industry and doing stuff and content and all of that, was studying the weather impacts as it relates to fantasy football. Because I just heard so many narratives about weather, whether it's wind, snow, rain, all of that other stuff. Like if it's windy, it's going to be shorter passes. If it's raining, it's going to be more the ground and pound type of game. All of those narratives. And because I do have a technical background, like we were talking before the show started, I'm an engineer for the Air Force. And so being able to analyze, manipulate, and try and tease out takeaways from data, that's kind of my thing. So I was like, well, I haven't really seen anybody talk about this stuff. So I'll pull some data and see if there's any way I can try and debunk some of that stuff, or at least contextualize it to a point where we can actually have some actionable takeaways versus people just yelling on the internet saying, oh, it's 15 miles per hour, say to everybody and all that stuff.
Say to everyone. It's funny. That's actually where I first started following you, and I can't believe I never put that together, the WX for the weather. But it's so I don't know if you know so I have a Fantasy 101 and the weather in there. So I came up. I'll see if you agree. You are the weather person. So I gave the simplest version, because obviously there's a lot more context to it. But I gave them the 15, 25, 35 rule. So it's very simple. Like 15 plus win, maybe a tie break. 25 plus win, start to be concerned. 35 and below, also start to be concerned. And kind of like did it that way to like if any of those two overlap, even more concerned. But like a very simple, like not perfect, but kind of gives you like at least a range of like where you should start to have any concerns. Do you like is that simple enough?
I think that is completely fair, because I think one of the biggest things that I've noticed when people like start to put out those narratives is that we really don't have a lot of data or games just in and of themselves to really harbor any sort of takes at all. I think we get so anchored because we watch some of the windy games or the games where there's just a torrential downpour or the heavy snow games, and say those are proxies for every other wind, snow, and rain game that's ever going to happen for the rest of time. And we know that's not true. So that's it. I think having simple heuristics like that to say, well, if it's around here, okay, maybe start to pay attention a little bit more. If it gets a little bit higher, maybe pay attention more. I think that is completely fair.
Well, and it's good behind Chris, if you're watching on YouTube, the Bills hat, one of the best in the snow, LaShawn McCoy.
I remember that. And that's one of those games where people will always remember that. It's still stuck in my mind.
Yeah. All right. So we are going to talk running backs to start, wide receivers and some worries before we get out of here. It is week 15, so we're only going to touch on a few of each because it's only the important ones at this point. Obviously, as of today, for everybody out there, if you're listening to this podcast, this is actually Monday at halftime, as I did with Michael Florio last week. So if anything happens Tuesday morning with reports or even Tuesday afternoon, we haven't seen it yet. So we're going to kind of give you the possibility. As of right now, Guerendo sounds like he avoided major injury. If he plays, simple enough, he plays, especially if they're going to risk him on a short week. You would assume he's going to be fine. But the question for you, Chris, is in my waiver column, when people are finally listening to this tomorrow, depending on when you've listened to the podcast or read the article, they'll see I do have Patrick Taylor, but he's not even the first running back because I don't believe personally, and maybe you disagree and I'm kind of curious, I don't believe this is a Guerendo situation. I don't believe this is a Jordan Mason situation. I don't believe this is Elijah Mitchell situation. I believe this is now potentially full-blown committee. Patrick Taylor does lead, but Debo gets run. You might see more for Keyshawn Vaughn. Abanaconda might be activated. And I think while the lead, this isn't the 80% workload that we want. So Taylor desperation, but I don't know if he would even crack my top 25 if Guerendo is out. Are you on that, or you think that maybe they're just going to stick with what has been a bell cow approach for their running backs?
I don't think so at this point, and because they've had so many injuries, whether it's to CMC, to Isaac Guerendo, to Jordan Mason, all of those guys, then trying to get as many of the other guys worked in just so they can finish out the season, I think makes the most sense. And also seeing Deebo Samuel out on social media earlier today saying he's not getting the ball enough, I wonder if there's going to be some sort of squeaky wheel narrative that goes into Thursday night. And I know some folks might look at the overall season stats for the Rams and look at how many yards per game they'll allow to opposing running backs and say, oh, this is a team that we want to target. But we just saw them limit James Cook to 30 yards on the ground. And I guess I forget what you saw Josh Allen do as a runner. Let's just focus on what James on designed rushes, not Josh Allen scrambles. The Rams were limiting a lot of running backs. And that's actually been the case so far throughout the entire season. It was really only running up against Saquon Barkley, who dunked on him for 255 yards a few weeks ago, and Alvin Kamara getting over the century mark. I mean, those have really been the two main splashes against the Rams defense, the Aaron Donald-less Rams defense. And so we've seen most of them limit guys to around 70, 80 yards. And honestly, it was about 5 or 6 week stretch where they didn't allow a rushing touchdown, at least to running backs. Yeah. So if this is going to be a potential situation where we get Guerendo, Patrick Taylor, maybe even the juice might be loose down the field with Kyle Juszczyk getting involved as well. Stashing Patrick Taylor, I can understand it, but having the confidence to start him, I don't know if I'm going to be there, especially on a short week.
So two things about that is you're right. I actually mentioned this in my ranks column last week, is that after the Alexander Madison game, and it did take 23 carries to get to 92 yards. They limited Aaron Jones. Kenneth Walker needed 25 carries just to get to 83. HM was completely shut down. Stevenson, 20 carries to get to 73. And then, yes, Barkley and Kamara had big games, but then, as you mentioned, they bounced back with stuffing James Cook most of the game. It's not as easy as people thought before they hit their bye. The second part about that is I was super proud of myself today. I actually wrote Kyle Juszczyk, and I spelled his last name correctly the first try.
Oh, hats off to you. I can't do it.
I was like,
I can't.
I was just like, wow, I can't believe I finally did it. I finally, how many tries did it finally take in my career to get Juszczyk right? But is it, Jusz, wait, because I got a picture.
Oh, see, look, did I jinx you?
No, because I'm trying to think, I'm picturing it. So CZYK, right?
Okay.
CZ, yeah,
Kyle Juszczyk. Trust you on that. It's him and Jimmy Garoppolo. Of course, they both play for the same team. It's I can't do it. I just can't.
So wait, let's say Juszc, and it's not YZ, it's ZYK. Juszczyk. I think. Yeah, there we go. I just had to make sure. It's easier. It's actually easier to type it out. But anyway, enough times talking about Juszczyk, and I just, as you can tell, I'm really proud of that moment.
I would be too.
On the Jets side of things, similar kind of scenario where we don't really know as of today. Obviously, Breece Hall with the injury had been the weirdest part about it. And I know you know this, Chris, and this isn't spending a lot of time on this, but the week before when it was questionable, and then he has the biggest workload he's had in 6 weeks. And then last week he's out, and it's out multiple days before we even had the game. But we saw Braelon Allen, and somebody that I'm a fan of, and I still wasn't expecting this. I actually said Isaiah Davis pre-draft comp. I was like, he could be like a Jalen Warren type. And I wasn't expecting 50-50, and it was almost 50-50. Yep. And Isaiah Davis, not just the passing game, getting lead runs, which is the concern. So again, Breece Hall comes back. You're going to start Breece Hall, and then Braelon Allen and Isaiah Davis are going to be like pretty much untrustworthy because you don't know how they're going to split behind Hall. But if no Hall, again, similar to Guerendo, no Hall, would you expect them to roll out the same approach? And in that case, because we have every 32 teams backfields on a disposal here, are they both RB3s for you? Because I feel like they might be they have ceilings for higher, but I don't think I could trust either one as more than an RB3 with everybody at our disposal this week.
Right, exactly. And that's why I would have some concern about having confidence starting either of them, because Braelon Allen, 55% of the carries. Isaiah Davis, 45%, both around 50% of the team snaps. So it wasn't like you can hang your hat on any specific stat that would say that I have to start Braelon Allen or I have to start Isaiah Davis. But honestly, the biggest thing that I'm more concerned about was this the real Jets offense? Can we really trust this is what Aaron Rodgers is going to be? It was his first 300-yard passing game since 2021.
But Chris, it was also Aaron Rodgers on a torn ACL, a busted ankle. Like apparently he's rolling out there with no legs. Apparently at this point, he's like, what's his face from the movie where Run for Forrest Gump, the guy in the wheelchair. That was basically Aaron Rodgers.
Oh yeah,
Lieutenant
exactly.
Dan. He's Lieutenant Dan.
He's Lieutenant Dan, and anything that he can do to drum up as much excitement about this Egypt documentary that he's got coming out in a couple weeks. I mean, despite the fact that the team is still taking L's left and right, he has to at least be able to jump. Like, I'm just going out there and putting my body on the line, throwing for under 300 passing yards and all of that. Like, all right, man, you do what you got to do. But I would say that's my larger concern about this offense. I mean, multiple weeks so far with negative EPA per play marks for the Jets offense. Really trying to lean mostly on Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams for any sort of production from that team. So while they do have a good matchup this upcoming week, or theoretically a good matchup going up against the Jaguars, I mean, Rams and Bills after that throughout the playoffs. So yeah, you might have picked up a guy that scored a touchdown if you banked on if you got Isaiah Davis, or if you think the workload is going to be there for Braelon Allen, okay, cool. But if you're not really confident about starting either of the two in week 15, they got bad matchups in week 16 and week 17. What's the purpose of them being on your roster at this point at all? I mean, and that's assuming that Breece Hall doesn't even come back, because if he comes back, then it's like you completely have a roster clogger on your hands. So it's a tough call for both of them.
Well, then let me throw out another tough call. Let's, again, play the assumption game, because there's one way that we know. Sincere McCormick, volume reliant if Alexander Madison's out. I'm not going to get super excited about him. I would say a floor over. So this scenario is how I would play it, is that no Breece Hall, ceilings higher for both Jets, floor better for McCormick. And I think you pretty much would agree with that. The question comes Monday night, the second of two Monday nights. For everybody out there, a reminder, we're playing this game again, 2 Monday Night Football games this week. But if Alexander Madison returns, it's both off the table, right? Like, I'm not crazy to say, like, I'm 100% out on the Raiders if Alexander Madison's out there.
Yeah, there's no question about it, because they haven't even made a decision about which quarterback is going to wind up replacing Aiden O'Connell. What Aiden O'Connell said that he might try and push to play because he has the bone bruise. It's like, really?
They were like, was it just, did I miss, like, oh, by the way, he might go on IR. And then it's like, oh, he might play this week. Like, what the hell happened in the span of 12 hours?
It's the same thing with Michael Pittman earlier in the season. Remember that, when he was like, oh, I might go on injured because of my back, but then I'm just going to play a full complement of snaps like the following, like 3 days later. I do not understand how the players' medical situations. I get none of that. Yeah. But I'm with you, though, that it's more of a floor play for Sincere, assuming Madison is going to be out, because he did get 60% of the carries just this past week, also mixed in for a couple of targets here and there. So at least the volume should be there. But it's an offensive environment. I mean, one where, regardless of who the passer is going to be, I mean, yes, AOC popped up for that really strong performance against the Chiefs, completely bottoms out just this past week in what we thought was going to be a better matchup for him. And while I would say in weeks 16 and 17, they get the Jaguars, I think, in week 16, the Saints in week 17. So good matchups against running backs. But if he is going to be on one of those teams, it's going to be down there averaging less than, let's say, around 225, 250 passing yards per game, which is going to then limit the yards per drive, limit the amount of snaps that he could potentially see once they get into the red zone, which is going to be the money touches that we need for running backs. You know, it's kind of one of those more of those floor plays that you would get probably in the high end RB3, very, very low end RB2. I think that's about the best you could hope for Sincere at this point.
All right, well then I'm kind of grinning over here because I'm about to ask you a tough question. It's only Monday night. But like forecasting ahead, I'm going to give you have no Breece Hall, so you have both Jets at your disposal. You do have Alexander Madison back, so it's both Raiders, and then you have to pick between both Broncos.
Both Broncos?
What would be the one running back from both Jets, both Broncos, and both Raiders that you would roll out in Week 15 with your first round playoffs on the line? Is the answer none? Like, is the answer just?
The answer could be none, honestly. I
Kendra Miller.
I would try. I mean, you could potentially make the case, and this is just based off of more of a vibes based take than anything else. But you can make the case that for Jaleel McLaughlin for Denver, that over this bye week, they've seen how little they've been able to get out of Javonte Williams. They know what they have in Audric Estime being more that early down back, that short yardage guy, that they try and use Jaleel McLaughlin a bit more. He's been the more efficient running back. He's been the more explosive running back. And he also has some utility in the passing game. So if we want to get Bo Nix away from some of those aggressive throws, I was really surprised how aggressive he was throwing downfield against the Browns a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they try and adjust that and they say, all right, well, it's fine to have that aggression, but let's at right time, right place. And they try and use a guy like McLaughlin in order to settle him down a bit, because it's not like they have a ton of tight ends or even pass catchers in general that they really want to try and use in that shorter area of the field. So I wonder if McLaughlin offers that to him along with being the more efficient runner. So this is more on a vibes-based take that I could say I would want to have McLaughlin out of those, but there's no real indication that he's going to take over that backfield at this point. It's just been that rotation between the three.
Which I hope you're right, because I had McLaughlin as one of my 5 breakout running backs this year. And so far, I mean, it's happened a few times, but not overall. The Chargers backfield, Gus Edwards saved his day with a touchdown. And at this point, whether or not you, as in Chris, is a fan of Kimani Vidal, the seemingly 90% of the fantasy community wants it to happen. Like, I keep pushing back against it and I'm like, chill out. Like, it's not that good. But I will say this week against Tampa Bay, and what could potentially be a passing more, could you see yourself, like me, feeling the pull to rank Vidal ahead of Gus Edwards this week?
I would want to. It's just, are the Chargers and Greg Roman going to allow us that satisfaction that it will actually happen? Because I was honestly surprised that in this primetime matchup, in a game where I would have expected the Chargers to come out and pass a bit more, because it's not the Chiefs' defensive front that's their weakness. It's been their secondary. So I would have thought even without Ladd McConkey, there would have been more dropbacks for Justin Herbert. I know he was getting walloped like all over the field, but still, I mean, Vidal mixed in for about 6 to 7% of the targets in his final 2 seasons at Troy. So I would assumed, again, I mean, if you're in a game where you lose Will Dissly earlier on in the match, you're relying on Quentin Johnston. We know that he's been shaky of a pass catcher as of late. And really it's just Stone Smart and Joshua Palmer and a few other guys that they would involve in a bit more in the passing game. But at least he got a couple of targets. So, okay, so we can kind of hang our hat on that. We know that the Buccaneers, that they've been more prone to pass catching running backs than just your straight line runners, like a guy like a Gus Edwards in the past. So if the situation already sets up well enough for Vidal to really make his production from that standpoint, and if we really don't know what the timeline for McConkey is going to be, hope he's going to be back in week 15, but nothing's for sure yet. So I would say, yeah, I have at least a little bit more confidence that after looking at how things played out this week, they do want to try and get Vidal involved a bit more. I mean, 53% of the snaps, that's more than Gus Edwards just this past week. It's just that Edwards was the one to take that final plunge into the end zone. So I think there is some credence to the idea that Vidal is a bit more involved, even if Ladd McConkey is back in week 15.
All right, so let's jump to wide receivers. And this one, probably for more shallow leagues, but it might be, it'll actually tie a little bit of a start set into it. And the number 1 wide receiver is one that was up there last week as well, because he's still not even 50% rostered. It's Adam Thielen. And whether that's doubts about Bryce Young, doubts about Thielen, just might be a lot of teams are inactive at this point. And that's why I say this might be for 10-teamers that haven't picked them up yet. But more so the fact that I said this on the Sirius XM show, and see, this will be the simplest version to see if you agree with it. I broke it down on the recap podcast, if anyone goes back and listen to that. But the brief version is that Bryce Young's style of what he needs to do, similar to Kyler Murray, similar to Drew Brees, when you're short, you need to find lanes through your offensive lineman to throw through and actually see. And what works well with these wide receiver or these quarterbacks a lot is wide receivers that are kind of big slotties. And that's what I like to call them. Adam Thielen, he's a big slotty at this point, and he's kind of mostly been for most of his career. Yeah. But it's no surprise, is what I said, that Bryce Young's resurgence has also coincided with the return of Adam Thielen. So this is where I'm going with it, Chris, is not just that he's a pickup even in 10-team now, but the reason he's a pickup in 10-teamers is because going forward, he's a top 25 wide receiver. Can you come with me on that one?
Oh, 100%. Week 13, 26% of the targets. Just this past week, 34% of the targets. So over the last 3 weeks, and that's with Adam Thielen's return, Bryce Young, 11th in yards per drive, 14th in third down conversion rate. That's almost a complete flip of where he was at in his first 2 weeks of this season. The same time when Bryce Young had to literally had to jump and pass to Chuba Hubbard and just like a short flat route. That was back in like week 2. And now he's standing in the pocket, taking shots, leading 99-yard drives down the field to potentially beat the Eagles just on Sunday. Like the poise, the pocket presence, and all of that, at least it leads me to believe that he's in a much better spot as a quarterback as compared to where he was in the first couple weeks of the season. With Adam Thielen operating as their wide receiver one, especially in PPR leagues, with that type of volume, you have to at least consider him as a top 24 wide receiver, regardless of what the matchup looks like for Carolina.
I couldn't agree more. I love it. All right, then I'm actually going to skip past the Packers because the Dobbs situation, I'll do it on the ranking show for everybody out there that's probably going to ask. Watson, Dobbs, both available out there, still under 6. They've been under 60% the entire season. So this is why I say I'll talk about it on the ranking show, because Romeo Dobbs, Chris, was in the preseason waivers and every single week since. And I understand that he's just slightly better Demario Douglas at this. Yeah. Sorry. In case you didn't know this, when I do it on podcast, I have to do this. It's Demario Douglas. I have to do it. They have to do it the right way. So that's the thing is like, yeah, sure. And I know that's more of a floor than a ceiling, but we'll save that because I want to talk about my next boy anyway. And I say my boy because I kind of want you to, if you agree, cool. But this is kind of like, you know how it is. It's like we have players we become fans of, and you kind of pull from them. Sometimes they can cloud your perception because you're kind of like, oh, I'm waiting. I want it to happen. I want it to happen. I want it to happen. It happens. And you're like, oh, it's finally happening. But it's kind of like, well, is it really? Or is it kind of just, I've been waiting for it. So Jalen McMillan in the pre-draft was one of my favorite underrated wide receivers, because I go back to the Washington, and this is the reference I always gave, is that two things. One is I love how he just knows how to find space. Second, if you watch the playoff game, what did he do? He finally got back to being healthy and found space and found space and found space, and Penix found him in space. And that's why as soon as Chris Godwin got hurt, I was like, ooh, what does Chris Godwin do? It's what Jalen McMillan does. But Jalen McMillan, as we know, got hurt, came back, Shepard started being a thing. It's taken a while, but it finally hit this past game, so much so that not just routes, but snaps, routes, and everything was higher than Shepard. He was actually 12 or 11 or 12 routes higher, if I remember correctly. It's in the waiver column. So I'm saying to say is, like I've been saying, pick him up, stash him in deep leagues, and it finally hit. Is this enough for you to say he's a must pick up? Not necessarily a good start, because this week is a bad matchup on paper. Maybe this is a pick up and wait and see, because, oh, by the way, Tampa Bay, if I remember correctly, I'm going to pull them up while I'm looking. But yes, the next 2 games after this, Cowboys and Panthers, by the way. But is this put it this way, I'll put the term on it, priority pickup because of what he could possibly do for you in week 16 and 17?
I would say he's the number one ad for this week. Number one ad, but not necessarily a start, just because of the matchup that you just identified. But let's talk about this way for rookies. I try and look at, do they have the talent in order to get onto the field? And then once they're on there, do they also have the offensive environment to flourish and showcase that talent? So from a talent standpoint, to your point, when he played out in Washington, the year before his final season at Washington, he was actually outproducing Rome Odunze from a yards, targets. All of that, the metrics that we care about from a rookie standpoint. But then he got hurt, and of course, Rome Odunze takes over, and then the rest is history. But for now looking at his situation in Tampa, of course, having to play against Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, that makes sense that he wouldn't be the highest target earner, but we at least saw a path for him to get on the field because Chris Godwin plays in the slot, Mike Evans plays X, and Jalen McMillan can play that Z receiver role. So it allows him to get on the field and be that third wide receiver, which for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, they play three wide receiver sets at one of the highest rates in the league. So on the field, earning a few targets here and there, and we saw that. And then now, just this past week, 27% of the targets. And of course, it would be a lot cooler, at least from an aesthetic standpoint, if it was Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Jalen McMillan all having, being able to work together and see how that offense could flourish without Mike Evans. We're assuming he's going to be gone, maybe not next year, but the year after that. And what that pass game could evolve to in the next couple of years. But still, wide receiver 2-ish range, I would say, for Jalen McMillan. Just looking how that offense operates, top 12 in early down passing rate, top 12 in pass rate over expectation. Baker's averaged around like 36, 37 dropbacks per game. That's a top 12 rate in the league so far. That's across the entire season. So that's without Mike Evans, without Chris Godwin. We liked how much volume that Kate Otten and Bucky Irving and Rashad White, how much volume all those guys were getting like in those weeks without Evans or Godwin. So if you can get McMillan, I'd say he's probably the higher priority add because we don't know how the Guerendo situation is going to shake out. We don't know really like if there's going to be more work for any of the Jets running backs since we talked about them. So really McMillan does shape out to be the one that has a direct path to work and also has the matchups, not this week, but the following 2 weeks that will at least help you out from a wide receiver standpoint in the playoffs. So I'm with that.
All right, so these next two I want to loop together. Interesting enough, they had opposite weeks. So Westbrook-Akina, we all knew logically, we're like, this can't continue. And it was like, hey, the Jaguars, maybe it lasts one more game. And he was legitimately fingertips away from being one more game. He did it again. The interesting thing watching that game was, I don't know why, but the game plan for the Titans was apparently Will Levis throw it 80 times, 5 to 10 yards over the middle of the field and nothing else until finally at the end of the game where he hit Westbrook-Akina almost for that touchdown. On the flip side, speaking of hitting and not catching, Quentin Johnston hasn't been catching for weeks and people got frustrated and were like, we're done. I need to move on. Josh Palmer seemed to have some more trust than Justin Herbert, and Westbrook-Akina doesn't do it, but Johnston does. So I'm going to ask you this in just one question, very simple. If you had to pick up only one or the other, who do you think is more, actually, which scenario do you think is more likely? Westbrook-Akina bounces back, and I put that in quotes because we still don't expect him to catch a touchdown every week, or Johnston continues to turn the corner and actually be able to catch the ball consistently? Which do you believe in more?
I believe in QJ a bit more. And I would say it's less about his talent specifically because we don't know if the yips are coming back or whatever it is that's affected him, not last year, but also throughout parts of this season. But it's also the quarterback play. And Will Levis, of course, I know we memed him to death early in the season, like that Sports What Make It Art Twitter account. Hilarious. And all the stuff we got out of him and Will Levis was just chef's kiss. But with the way that Nick Westbrook-Akina plays, like primarily down the field, like his average depth of target over the past 4 weeks, I'm going to read them off to you real quick. Week 11, it was 18.4 yards. Week 12, 23.2 yards. Week 13, 12.3. And on Sunday, 16.5. I mean, while we like the touchdowns and we like the targets and we like the splashy plays, trying to hang your hat on that and expect that to happen every week, that's how you get stuff like week 14, where he only scores, what was it, like 3 points or something along those lines. That. So I would lean more towards a guy like Quentin Johnston because we know that his quarterback can hit the short and deep throws. Quentin Johnston is used in the short and intermediate fields and downfield. And even if he does have to compete against a guy like Ladd McConkey, who is a better target earner already in his first season, at least the offense and the quarterback, it puts him in a better situation than whatever we can expect out of Will Levis and the Tennessee Titans. Yeah.
100%. All right. So then I'll get you out of here on some worries. I always include some worry reports, and there's a quarterback. I definitively want to at least get to a quarterback and some like these two wide receivers for you. But first is the quarterback. Right. And I feel like I'm going to die on this hill, island, branch, whatever you want to call it at this point. But I've been saying, at least in a super flex and in a single quarterback, depending on what you were using to get here, I said do not start Kirk Cousins last week. I said, not even putting inside my top 20. It was a bad matchup. And yet, even with that bad matchup, watching that game and watching it back again, It's like Kirk Cousins looked as good as he did in the middle of the season when everybody was like, oh, it's fine. Kirk Cousins is back. He's 100%. And granted, the drives ended in interceptions twice. So it's like, he looks good. And then he threw 2 terrible picks. But in a bad matchup, he looked good. And what do the Falcons have but one of the cakiest of all cake schedules right there with the Titans and the Giants, which we don't care about the Giants because, unfortunately, there's nothing to like on that team. But as you know, Atlanta comes out of that bad matchup against Minnesota, and now they go to Vegas, which is a nice matchup, and he should have no problems in that game. He gets the Giants, should have no problems in that game. Heads to Washington, maybe Lattimore at that point is a little bit of a concern, but Kirk Cousins, if you were kind of playing the quarterback roulette waiver option, obviously Superflex he's going to be playing, but if you're playing a streamer, let me put it this way. If you had Anthony Richardson, I feel like would be the obvious one. But if the streamers out there were like a Caleb, you know what? I'll just throw that one straight out. Caleb Williams, Kirk Cousins, you had to pick up one to stream this week after what just happened with Caleb Williams. Who would you stream this week?
Might be, man, that is a tough one. It might be Caleb Williams, honestly.
Even in Minnesota?
It might be Caleb Williams. Well, I mean, because Kirk Cousins against Minnesota, he did get over 300 passing yards against them. Now, he had the 2 picks. But I could see a scenario where at least Cousins or Caleb Williams could wind up with probably the 2 picks, but he might have a couple of touchdowns. Because even in the game against Detroit, he wound up having at least one. Did he have 1 turnover? Or actually no turnovers. I'm remembering the game right. But either way, when he's been faced with pressure, he has been able to perform over these past few weeks. My concern for Caleb Williams is, though, now that they promoted Thomas Brown from their OC of passing game to OC, now to head coach, if there's less time that he's been able to dedicate to helping Caleb Williams' development, and we see something similar to what we just saw this past week for the 49ers. So that's a 1-game sample, but still. For Cousins specifically, I can see in all those 3 games that you just laid out, I mean, the Raiders, the Giants, the going up against the Commanders as well. Those could be good Bijan games. Those could be games where Bijan and Tyler Algier wind up having good games. Because the problem that I've had with Cousins all season is that they're not calling plays the same way that we thought they were going to call plays for Kirk Cousins in this semi-Rams type of setup where they bring in Zach Robinson over from the Rams. We're thinking high pass rate over expectation. We're thinking high-flying offense, Drake London, Darnell Mooney, like all those guys. And really, they've had negative dropback over expectation rate in pretty much every game but 2. Yeah. And so that's my problem, is that we've seen more of Bijan Robinson. I mean, much to the enjoyment of folks that roster Bijan and all that.
Robinson.
Right. But they've been like 28th in early down passing rate, leaving Kirk Cousins with a number of long down and distance situations on 3rd and 4th down. And that leads to this lack of success and efficiency that Kirk Cousins is having as a passer. So if he's not offering anything in the running game, where Caleb Williams is kind of being a bit more of a scrambler, at least Caleb has a few more outs to get there from a fantasy standpoint. Whereas Kirk Cousins is just essentially late stage Ben Roethlisberger, just like parking and barking, just like out there, and that's all we've got from him.
It's working at times. Are you telling me that Thomas Brown is going to be the new Freddie Kitchens? Is that what you're telling me?
That's what it sounded like. It's like a 1-game sample. Of course, in that 1 game where Thomas Brown isn't really holding all of the reins, like for Caleb Williams, he goes up against one of the better play callers in the entire league. I mean, in Kyle Shanahan, and they just get dog walked. I mean, up and down the field. So that could be just a bad timing for them to make that change in the personnel.
I thought, and I'm right, I was searching it while you were talking, and I was like, I feel like Freddie Kitchens has been in the news, and that's because he's the interim head coach at UNC, where Bill Belichick and his son all of a sudden might be heading. Also came to find out his first name is actually Charles. Never knew that about Freddie Kitchens. Is actually Charles.
I didn't know that either.
Charles Frederick Kitchens Jr. and shares my birth date. Much older than I am, but shares my birthday November 29th. And his wife, Ginger Kitchens. That just sounds like a weird name. Like Ginger's not it's not a non-common. Like, I mean, it's different. Like but like, you know, there was Ginger on Gilligan's Island, so it's not like. Yeah. But it just sounds weird with Kitchens. Ginger Kitchens.
Kitchens.
See, it sounds weird, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. All
right. So 2 more. Got you out here. So the wide receivers, but I'm going to put a pin on that, and then I'm going to go to the running back real quick and then come back to the wide receivers. So there's a running back that I was saying for the longest time, sell high, sell high, sell high. Get the heck out of here. And it's been down pretty miserable of late on a per-touch basis, but this running back keeps saving his day with a touchdown. But now there is no worse schedule for a running back coming up than Najee Harris. That's who I'm talking about. The per touch has been ineffective. It's been as bad as it was last year when everybody's screaming at the top of their lungs for Jalen Warren to be the lead. Najee Harris saved 3 of his last 4 games with a touchdown, averaging under 3 yards per carry in some games. And now he heads to Philly, heads to Baltimore, and comes back home for the Kansas City Chiefs. It is 3 of the 5 worst possible run defenses you could face for a running back. Are you like me saying, I'm hoping I don't need Najee Harris to even come close to my lineup for the playoffs?
Oh, 100%. I mean, just this past week, and less than 50% of the snaps, Jalen Warren played more, less than 50% of the carries. It was a mix between him, Warren, and Cordell Patterson. And honestly, the biggest disappointment for Najee Harris was the fact that he didn't get any targets. I noted a couple of weeks ago, and I was talking to both Ian and Dwayne about this, was that Russell Wilson wasn't just doing the moonball thing down to the perimeter, but he was hitting more shorter passes, and that was going more to running backs and tight ends. It's almost like 3 weeks in a row, around like 36% of Russell Wilson's attempts were going to running backs and tight ends. That's how Najee Harris was getting around 4 targets per game in weeks 11, 12, and 13. But just this past week, nothing. It really was just Warren getting most of those looks, Cordell Patterson also mixing in, and really just relying on the ground production for Najee. So to your point, if we're looking at him having to face, some of the toughest matchups, all 3 of the teams that you just mentioned, bottom 5, bottom 10, and rushing yards allowed to the running back position over the next 3 weeks. Yeah, I can see a scenario where, Najee Harris might get the ceremonial start, but then Jalen Warren will instantly take over because he has looked like, at least watching those games, because I live in Ohio, I have to watch these AFC North games almost every single week. So I see those games, and Warren looks like the better back out of the 2.
Yeah, I completely agree with that one. All right, so I'm going to get you out of here on this. I'm going to throw 3 wide receivers at you and give the reasons to potentially be concerned, and you tell me who you're most concerned about. All right. So first is easy, obvious why concern is Malik Nabers in this quarterback situation, this entire team, which, by the way, just lost another offensive lineman in John Runyon. So they're down yet another. Might be back to Tommy DeVito, might be Drew Lock. Who the heck cares? Malik Nabers actually not garbage, but kind of like, at least it was in the trash bin on the way to the garbage time last week. It was because it was like, that's kind of what he's been doing. It's not complete garbage time, but it's like on the way there. He's like halfway to the. So anyway, Malik Nabers' concern. Marvin Harrison, which we just know at this point. Yes, it wasn't the season we wanted, but it's 1 week good, 1 week bad, 1 week good. And it's not always back to back, but that's how it's been. And then what I think might be the most surprising, I threw this wide receiver of the 3 in the column because since week 5, 7-game span because this wide receiver missed games, only has 2 double-digit scores, has 1 touchdown in that range, and his fantasy points per game are tied with Romeo Doubs as wide receiver 44. And everybody hold on to your seat because when I'm about to say DK Metcalf, you might fall out of your chair.
Yeah.
DK Metcalf, Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison, who are you the most worried about if you need them in your fantasy playoffs for a championship?
I think I would be most concerned with DK Metcalf.
Which is crazy. Because if you're like, hey, I'm on Madden and I'm going to create a player of like who's the greatest specimen ever for wide receiver, it'd be like, oh, I'm going to make DK Metcalf.
Yeah, the man looks like he comes from Wakanda, like him and like Anthony Richardson. They both like they come out of a comic book, but it's just how he's been used over these past few weeks. Jackson Smith and Jigba essentially taking over the wide receiver 1 role for that team. And I know most folks are probably going to scream that, well, he's had the shoulder injury that's had him like beat up. He's had the knee injury for a couple of weeks as well. And so I get that. But if he's out there on the field, the team at least expects him to be able to perform well enough to be a good receiver for the team. I know he did get around 60, 70 yards just this past week on 4 or 5 targets. But if Jackson Smith and Jigba has taken over the downfield role, Geno Smith is looking to him a bit more once he's under duress and has to fire downfield and looking for somebody to make a play. That's been JSN's role the past month or so. I would say that I'm most concerned for DK Metcalf because he carries one of those. I think it's especially for fantasy gamers. We're going to look at those players on our bench, and for as many years as so many analysts have been like the start your studs thing that's been said, you're going to look at your roster and be like, it's DK Metcalf. The ESPN projection is telling me he's going to get 11 points this week. I'm like, how can I sit him? But if you look at how much he's been used and how much he's been able to produce off of that lack of usage compared to JSN, he has to be one of those because I'm the most worried about because I fear that a lot of people with him on their roster, they're going to put him in just because he is one of their studs. Like they've attached that. Yeah, they've attached that wide receiver one role to their minds, and just like, I have to start him no matter what. And he's going to get you those 8, 9, 10 PPR points, and then that might be the reason you get knocked out of the playoffs.
I'll give you one name, and then we'll get out of here, of one that I think most people would say yes at this point, but maybe not. And this is why, because there might be more inexperienced people listening, 10-team leagues again. But as long as Brock Purdy's center, underneath center, Juwan Jennings is in the lineup before DK Metcalf for me.
That is correct. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, even after Juwan Jennings came back from that hip injury, what was that, week 10, week 11? What was it, CMC's first game back? 30% of the team's targets. Just walked right back in to a 30% target share. That's all I needed to see.
Who would last longer in a fight with prime Mike Tyson, Juwan Jennings or Ladd McConkey? Because it's like both of them, they just don't go down. There's just like, I'm going to 17 injuries. I'm going to still keep going.
Yeah, they just keep on getting back up. They are like Captain America. They can do this all day, man. Like it really takes multiple injuries like Ladd McConkey did, because it was the knee and shoulder, remember, that he sustained last week that had to get him out of there. And he also had a hip injury like McConkey did earlier this season. So it's just taking these just a pile up of injuries. I
remember like Jennings in that first game back, and he took that shot and went down so hard. And then it's like 2 plays later, he's like, I'm back out there. Let's go.
Yeah, it's like, let's just go. I'm like, man, you can take a rest for a snap or two. It's okay.
Chris Allen, at Chris Allen FFWX, which, as you have heard now, is because he got started in the business with Weather. He's one of the better ones. They're all great, but one of the better ones over at Fantasy Life, which you can check him out there. Sunday mornings, if you get your last-minute questions in, make sure you catch them there. Any parting thoughts or things? I know you pimped yourself once already, but like maybe something else, anything you want to get people out there to know before we get out of here.
Oh, no, just other than just saying thank you so much for having me on. It's just been a blast to be able to chop it up with you. And I'll just have to pimp the site. Wonderful place to work at. Even better content, fantasylife.com. Check out all the stuff we have, from the YouTube channel to the articles to the newsletter that comes out every week from our own Pete Overzet. Once you get a chance, go check it out and get signed up for the newsletter, and you'll thank me later.
Well, and you have my friend and former boss, Nando DeFino, in charge of you over
He's
there.
all right.
Yeah,
all right.
Make sure you tell him that I said friend first this time. He'll know why when you talk to him.
I will. I'll talk to him on Sunday.
The ranking show. We'll be back on with normal day Wednesday this week. And as we wait for Fox to just cut me off at some point, as I always do, I'm going to say that this was fun watching Chris with his Bengals and Bill's hat behind him. See, this is what Fox
between the two.
It's all love. At some point, he's just going to be like, I'm going to